Hey guys, tonight we begin with something intricate, a bit musty, and undeniably human, the medieval inn. Imagine it, a place where strangers shared firelight, food of questionable origin, and the occasional suspicious glance. Where ale ran almost as freely as rumors, and the beds creaked in protest under the weight of exhaustion and old secrets. Before you tuck yourself in, don't forget to support the channel if you enjoy this strange little corner of history, and leave a note in the comments telling us where in the world you're listening from, and at what hour of the night. I always love knowing who's joined this quiet gathering across the globe. Now dim the lights, let the hush of a late fan fill the room, and let's wander back together, step by muddy step, into the thick, fragrant world of a day at the inn. The innkeeper does not wake so much as become aware, dragged from a fog of semi-sleep by the alarming sound of someone sneezing violently onto the floorboards just beneath his bed. There's a groan, a crash, and the thudding panic of a chicken in full escape mode. Again. With a sigh deeper than the straw mattress beneath him, he opens one eye. Darkness still clings to the room. In medieval timekeeping, this means nothing. It's either too early or embarrassingly late. There is no standard to measure it by. Still, he sits up slowly, peeling himself from the bed as if from an overly affectionate loaf of rye. The bedding beneath him is humble, to say the least. A mattress, stuffed with straw, sloped slightly so one is always aware of gravity's opinion. A blanket lies draped across his legs, infused with the smells of garlic, ale, and the faintest trace of last week's mud. It's not unpleasant, exactly. More like being wrapped in a damp traveling cloak that knows your sins, but says nothing. He wipes his eyes with a sleeve that has long forgotten the crispness of clean linen. Somewhere in its past, it might have been fine cloth. Now it resembles the hide of something that once roamed. Dressing is a process of patience and memory. First, the tunic, creased and stubborn, then the trousers, which smell faintly of sheep and stale herbs. The belt proves elusive at first, hiding behind the door in a tangle of forgotten items. A spoon, a melted candle stub, and one lone sock that doesn't belong to him. He does not question it. Questions before dawn are the devil's tools. Downstairs, the main room of the inn lies in a kind of suspended animation. Chairs lean like drunks mid-story. A tankard sits tipped near the hearth, dripping last night's ambition onto the flagstones. A pair of boots rest beside the ashes, their owner nowhere to be seen. And beneath one of the tables lies a man, fully asleep, breathing with the contented rasp of someone who knows precisely how this story ends, and doesn't mind repeating it. The innkeeper steps over him with the grace of long practice. Waking guests too early tends to lead to confused accusations, followed by the very real possibility of blades being drawn in sleepy indignation. He stokes the hearth gently, coaxing embers like a shepherd with old sheep. No need for a roaring fire. Wood is dear, and the last time someone built one worthy of song, a guest attempted to roast a goose inside, feathers and all. As the pot warms on the hearth, accepting the shapeless remnants of yesterday's stew, the muffled sound of hooves reaches the door and a mule brays into the morning gloom. Travelers are arriving. Already, he sighs again. The inn is not grand, nor particularly clean, nor ever truly quiet, but it is his, and that, for a man with calloused hands and a ledger full of half-paid debts, is enough. The day begins. Breakfast at the inn is a negotiation between hunger and hygiene, between memory and guesswork, between what was cooked and what can be legally claimed as edible. The innkeeper reaches for the ladle and dips it into the pot. It comes up with a viscous glob of warmth that defies naming. Some kind of pottage, the eternal companion of medieval appetites. It smells faintly of barley, old turnips, and something that may have once been goose. Possibly. Or a mistake. Pottage is not a dish so much as an understanding. What was not eaten yesterday becomes today's base. A little water, a little salt if there's any left, and heat, that's all it asks. And in return, it offers a meal that fills the belly and fogs the mind just enough to push back the day's doubts. Bread is served too. Flat, dense, and with the consistency of construction material. Knives bend before it. Teeth regret it. But it softens if left in the pottage long enough. Not soft, exactly. Less hostile. Ale is poured, as it always is, because water is a gamble and milk belongs to the Lord's barn cat. This ale is weak, barely alcoholic, but at least it has been boiled. It is not a luxury, but a strategy, consumed by adults and children alike. And thus, breakfast is served. The guests arrive in slow, shambling 2s and 3s. A merchant, eyes darting, coin purse clutched like a relic. A pilgrim, barefoot and blistered, still whispering prayers through cracked lips. And the bard. There is always a bard. He asks for honey, as if the jar hasn't been locked in a chest beneath the floorboards since Lent. The barmaid, Marjorie, says nothing, simply gives him porridge and a look that could straighten a bent nail. She dances between tables without ever appearing to hurry. Her tray tilts, never spills. Her smile flickers only when required. Compliments bounce off her like rain off a thatched roof. She has seen it all, dodged most of it, and carries on with the calm of someone who could, if necessary, snap a spoon in half with one hand. By the end of breakfast, the room smells of wood smoke, wet wool, and barley. Bowls clink, tankards empty. Stomachs settle into a kind of uneasy satisfaction. It is not a feast, but it is food, and nobody has died, which, by the standards of the age, is worthy of celebration. By mid-morning, the inn begins to fill with what can only be described as humanity's roughest symphony. People arrive not in 2s and 3s anymore, but in a rolling tide. Dusty boots, frayed cloaks, and questionable motives pass through the wooden door, each with their own needs, smells, and stories. The first to arrive is a man wearing rusted armor and a title he may have inherited from a dream. He calls himself a knight. His helm dangles from a fraying rope, his gauntlets mismatched, and his boots appear to be lined with straw for warmth. Or perhaps they've simply been abandoned by the previous owner. He strides in as though expecting trumpets. The inn greets him with silence and the smell of damp barley. He requests a private room. When informed that such rooms require payment, he simply grunts and slams down a piece of tarnished metal shaped vaguely like a coin. It is not one. Next comes a young apprentice dressed better than he ought to be. His mouth moves before his boots stop. He speaks of ships and spice routes, trade empires and market shares, all while producing a string of buttons as payment for stew. He tries to haggle like he's at a bazaar, asking for a discount on a dish that costs less than a candle. The innkeeper stares. The buttons remain on the counter. The stew remains in the pot. Then, inevitably, the bard returns. Or perhaps it's a new bard wearing the same look of misplaced purpose. He doesn't pay, of course. He never does. He claims his music is payment, launching into a mournful tale about a goat that stole his heart and his laundry. His lute is missing more strings than it has. The guests do not clap. One man coughs. Another loudly stirs his ale. The bard sings louder. A monk appears, silent and solemn, dressed in robes that have seen both pilgrimage and poultry. He blesses the chairs as he passes and insists he is fasting. Within minutes, he is found eating crusty bread and muttering that it does not count if it is shared. The inn does not argue. It has learned this lesson before. And so the room swells, not just with people, but with stories colliding in the way only inns and battlefields allow. A man dries his socks on the hearth, while another sharpens a knife that likely hasn't seen a whetstone in months. A child darts between benches, pursued not by a parent, but by a goose with personal grievances. No one knows where the goose came from. It seems to have history with someone here. Possibly everyone. In the far corner, two travelers argue about a stool. One insists it wobbles more than it did yesterday. The other claims ownership. Neither considers standing. They continue to debate in hushed, aggressive tones, as though they are speaking on behalf of all stools everywhere. Through it all, the innkeeper observes. He doesn't react. He's learned not to. This day is not unlike any other. Before night falls, someone will fall in love, someone will fall asleep in their meal, and someone, most likely the bard, will attempt to duel a chair. It is tradition. Behind the counter, he polishes a mug with a rag that serves more as memory than function. The mug is not clean, but it is shinier. That's enough. The barmaid moves through the room, still poised, still dangerous, still the only person preventing total collapse. Their eyes meet. A nod is exchanged. It is not approval. It is recognition. The storm has come and the roof still holds. For now, she is known as Marjorie. No one is quite sure how old she is. 20 maybe, or 40, worn down by too many verses and not enough peace. She doesn't say. What she does is everything. With a tray balanced in one hand and authority in the other, she moves like someone dancing through a war zone, swift, deliberate, and immune to nonsense. A drunk mercenary once complimented her knees. He woke up 2 days later, nailed to the rafters by his boots. No one mentions it now. They remember the lesson. Marjorie speaks 4 dialects, pours ale with divine precision, and has memorized every terrible poem ever aimed at her by men with too much drink and not enough sense. She does not suffer fools. She organizes them. When she serves a table, she assesses each face in a glance. Who will pay, who will lie, and who might barter a shell for soup? She can sniff out a fake title, a stolen coin, or a romantic advance disguised as a complaint about stew temperature. Even the monk treats her with quiet reverence, which is more than he gives to most saints. Her day starts before sunrise. It ends only after the last tankard is scrubbed, or at least rinsed. Between that, she serves food, mends bruises, untangles arguments, and manages to avoid every flying elbow in a room designed for none of them. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. Her silence is sharper than a blade. To say she runs the inn is inaccurate, only by law. The innkeeper holds the deeds. Marjorie holds the floor. One word from her can silence a table. One look can make a merchant return the spoon he quietly slipped into his bag. This isn't power. It's gravity. Things simply fall into place around her. And so the day marches on, guests arrive, mugs are refilled, and in the middle of it all, she remains steady, unbothered, and entirely essential. If the inn is a ship tossed by storms of ale and egos, Marjorie is the keel. Without her, it would not float, it would not move, it would simply sink. Lunch at the inn does not arrive quietly. It doesn't announce itself with bells or refined aromas, but with the rustle of chairs, the clatter of boots, and the impatient tension that clings to hungry crowds in close quarters. It begins innocently enough, a warm hearth, the gentle bubble of stew reborn from breakfast's survivors, and Marjorie wringing a tired triangle that hangs from a nail near the kitchen door. For one heartbeat, the inn holds its breath. Then it erupts. Guests surge from nooks and corners as if summoned by ancient magic. A trader hurls himself over a half-sleeping dog. The bard spins his battered lute like a weapon, eyes gleaming with the misplaced confidence of a man who thinks music can win him stew. 2 farmers bicker over who claimed the bench first, despite 5 other benches lying completely empty. A knightly figure attempts to declare seating rights by virtue of a rusted medallion, and is met with glares that translate across all dialects as, "Sit down and hush." The innkeeper, practiced in the art of selective hearing, begins ladling out the midday meal. If the morning's pottage was a murky swirl of barley and despair, lunch has matured into something heartier, still greyish, still unidentifiable, but now with a consistency that suggests intention. He does not name the ingredients, partly because he's forgotten, partly because the stew has become something more metaphysical than culinary. It is food, but also a memory, a tradition, a dare. Bread is handed out like ceremonial tokens, flat, thick, and ominous in its density. Some attempt to soften it in the stew, but the bread resists. One man knocks over his bowl trying to break the crust. Another quietly tucks his piece into his satchel, perhaps to repair a hole in his roof. Marjorie watches it all with that distant stare shared by soldiers in long sieges and mothers of 7. Her tray is never empty. Her patience always near depletion. The noise climbs. Laughter, argument, song, and the occasional burst of questionable theology. A group of guards near the hearth begins a burping competition. A monk, cheeks full of bread, hums a psalm with such glee that it borders on blasphemy. Near the door, the goat returns. No one invited it. No one is surprised. Somewhere in this din, the child from earlier begins feeding the goat again. Whether out of charity, mischief, or a belief that it is a divine emissary is unclear. The goat accepts all motivations. Lunch continues, not by schedule, but by momentum. Spoons clash, crusts vanish. A man tries to trade a coin for a second helping and is reminded gently by Marjorie's stare that the inn is not a charity. Another tries to offer a poem. He is ignored. In the back corner, someone spills ale on their boots and curses the floor for being in the way. As the last bowls are scraped clean, a strange hush falls. Not silence exactly, but the collective exhale of a room that has eaten just enough to regret the effort. Bodies slump. Conversations lull. Someone drops a spoon, and it echoes like a bell in a chapel. A few heads jerk up. Then everyone relaxes again. The stew is finished. The bread has fought its last battle. The goat is escorted outside with the same sternness one might use for a repeat criminal. And now comes the part of the day no one enjoys, the aftermath. To the untrained eye, the room is merely disheveled. A few overturned mugs, some crumbs, a slipper under a stool. But to Marjorie and the innkeeper, it is a battlefield, a minefield of spills, mysteries, and objects that defy explanation. Onion skins cling to the rafters. A spoon has found its way into the chamber pot. A hat sits on the mantel, steaming for reasons unknown. The tables are wiped with a cloth that once aspired to cleanliness, but now mostly redistributes the grime. The innkeeper sweeps, or at least gestures at the floor with a broom, hoping gravity will do the rest. Under a bench, a boot is discovered. No one claims it. It joins the growing collection behind the bar labeled, "Possibly yours." Marjorie clears dishes like a machine built for purpose. Her movements are swift, efficient, and tinged with quiet fury. Guests who linger too long receive the look, a glance so potent it once made a noble apologize for his existence and tip a full silver piece. He never returned. His absence is not mourned. The stew pot is scraped, the dregs stirred and stored. Because in this inn, nothing is wasted. Not stories, not stew, and certainly not suspicions. The ale mugs are dipped in the rain barrel, spun once, and returned to their shelf with a kind of sacred optimism. Clean enough for tomorrow. Benches are nudged back into place. They wobble slightly more than before. But no one questions it. This is the rhythm of the inn. Mess, repair, repeat. Marjorie takes a breath. The hearth glows low. The air is thick with barley, ash, and weariness. And already, someone is asking when supper will be ready. Just as the last bowl is stacked and the final spoon dried with a resigned wipe of cloth, the door swings open again with the cheerless certainty of fate. More guests, new faces, fresh complications, and worst of all, questions. The first to enter is wrapped in a cloak so large it might have doubled as a tent on the road. Beneath it, a beard spills like a bramble hedge, housing secrets, crumbs, and possibly rodents. His eyes scan the inn like a man preparing a review that will be written on a parchment and spoken aloud to no one. He approaches the counter with solemn dignity and asks, "Do you serve almond milk?" The room falls silent. Not even the goat, recently re-expelled, dares to bray. A stool creaks under the weight of collective judgment. No one answers. Behind him comes a young couple, their clothing too neat, their manner too careful. They walk with the strained distance of people trying to pretend they are not intimately familiar. The woman, eyes cast downward, inquires if they might inspect the room before renting it. Marjorie, without changing expression, gestures upstairs. "It's got walls," she says flatly. "Usually." Then arrives a traveller, caked in dust and self-importance, demanding to know the provenance of the stew ingredients, the ethical treatment of the goat, and whether the candles are locally sourced. Before any reply can be formed, the goat trots back inside and sneezes directly on his boots. The man goes quiet. A bard enters too, but not the same one. This one carries a lute with more ambition than tuning and insists on paying with a song. He strums 3 broken chords and launches into a ballad about a woman who fell in love with a man cursed to always smell faintly of pickled eels. The performance ends when Marjorie approaches him with a broom, not lifted, just held. He takes the hint. The innkeeper doesn't flinch through any of this. He nods at demands, listens to complaints, and corrects no one. When asked about the wine list, he replies, "We have wine. It's reddish." That's as far as the conversation goes. Marjorie handles the rest with minimal words and maximal eyebrow. By sundown, the common room resembles a tapestry stitched from every known kind of personality. A quiet scribe tries to write in the corner, while 2 merchants near the hearth debate the price of dried figs like philosophers. The bard, uninvited, attempts a second round of courtship by song. The goat lies curled beneath a table, presumably taking notes for its memoir. Supper arrives not with grace, but with noise. Chairs scrape, tankards clank. Someone coughs theatrically in the universal language of, "I've been waiting longer than anyone." They haven't. They arrived 10 minutes ago and still wear their cloak like a badge of honor. Marjorie emerges from the kitchen holding a pot that is technically stew and possibly still warm. The contents are familiar. Too familiar. It's the same stew that was served at breakfast and lunch and, if history has taught anything, last Tuesday. Reheated, yes. Improved, no. It is served with another round of hard bread and the careful neutrality of a meal that does not want to be questioned. One traveller, chewing slowly, remarks, "This tastes different from last night." Marjorie, without pausing, responds, "It's the same." The traveller smiles nervously. "Right, lovely." At the back table, the merchants are now arguing about barley futures. Their voices rise. Next to them, the couple is having a whispered disagreement about the exact number of fleas counted on the bed upstairs. The goat, despite repeated removals, is again under the same table, being fed breadcrumbs by a child who insists it is a healing animal. The stew, for all its ambiguity, fills the belly. The ale, weak but persistent, begins to blur the edges of complaint. Someone questions the temperature of their bowl. Someone else wonders aloud whether the meat is from a bird, a beast, or a theological dilemma. No one gets a straight answer. They eat anyway. Behind the counter, the innkeeper wipes a mug that has not been truly clean since the last equinox. He watches the room with the weary contentment of a man who knows everything is slightly broken, but none of it is on fire. Yet, in less than an hour, someone will spill ale. Someone else will fall asleep mid-sentence. The bard will attempt a third serenade, likely ending with a spoon thrown in his direction, and through it all, the inn will remain standing, grumbling, groaning, but alive. Because supper at the medieval inn is not about quality. It is about endurance, and the quiet hope that just once, no one ends up bleeding. As the final spoon scrapes the bottom of a bowl and satisfied groans fill the smoky air, the real performance begins, not scheduled, not rehearsed, but entirely inevitable. Evening entertainment in the medieval inn is less a curated event and more a social landslide. There are no flyers, no performers' guilds, no curated playlists, only momentum, ale, and the precarious balance of too much stew and too few boundaries. The bard, still convinced of his worth, clears his throat like a man about to recite scripture. He strums his lute, which bravely survives the gesture, and announces the title of his next piece, The Fair Lady of Festerwell Who Married a Troll. The reaction is split. Half the room groans. The other half cheers as if he's just declared war. The goat sneezes in apparent protest. He sings with passion, if not precision. The melody wavers. The rhymes come reluctantly. But he carries on, animated by the belief that emotional volume can replace skill. Near the hearth, the innkeeper pours himself a mug and drinks with the deliberate patience of a man who knows there are still 5 verses to go, and that at least one will reference socks in an unsavory way. Meanwhile, in the corner, 2 old friends are locked in a slurred riddle contest. Their riddles are more puzzling than poetic. One of them might be a recipe, the other a complaint about taxes disguised as metaphor. No one wins, no one loses, and both seem satisfied. A monk covers his ears politely and hums a psalm loud enough to be heard over the chaos. It's a familiar ritual now, part resistance, part penance. The dice come out next. Small, wooden, dented, and possibly cursed. A crowd gathers. Bets are placed in coins, buttons, old pipe stems, and once again, someone's left shoe. The shoe's value is disputed, but the enthusiasm is not. Marjorie circles the room like a falcon with superior hearing. She sees everything, who's standing too quickly, who's slurring too hard, who's reaching for a table not meant to be stood upon. She intercepts the bard mid-gesture just as he attempts to balance one foot on a crooked bench for dramatic flair. Her glare alone is enough to deflate him back to his stool. In another corner, a shy traveller produces a flute, blows 3 lovely notes, and is immediately head-butted by the goat, which has returned for what seems to be its nightly encore. Applause follows, whether for the notes or the goat is unclear, possibly both. Evening at the inn is neither lawful nor elegant, but it is alive. The performances, such as they are, evolve without plan. A man attempts to juggle 2 eggs and a candle stub. He is stopped. Another claims he can speak to ghosts through ale foam. No one believes him, but he is allowed to demonstrate. There is no closing bell, no announcement, no kind usher leading guests to the door. Closing time is an unraveling, a soft, shuffling collapse of intention. It begins when the bard, having exhausted his limited repertoire, resorts to making theatrical throat noises and calling it experimental verse. A piece of bread is thrown, whether in admiration or protest, no one can say. Soon after, one guest leans so far back on his stool, he becomes furniture. His companion rests their feet on him without comment. Mugs are emptied with diminishing enthusiasm. Laughter drifts into silence. Bodies slump like forgotten coats. Marjorie begins stacking mugs like stone blocks in a fortress. Her silence sharpens. A single raised eyebrow from her is more effective than a speech. It means, leave now or wake up scrubbing. There is always one guest who asks for food long after the fire's gone out. Tonight, it's a traveling peddler who requests a light snack, by which he means a whole roast duck. He is given a crust of bread and a gentle warning to chew it slowly. The goat has found a corner, curled up by the warm ashes, unbothered by its frequent expulsions. At this point, the staff treat it like a very strange, very hairy regular. The innkeeper makes his final rounds. He pokes the fire with practiced care, listens for the soft rumbles of guests asleep in bowls, and moves a snoring traveler from table to bench with the subtle precision of a man who has done this too many times. Upstairs, the footsteps are slow, heavy, and full of second thoughts. A couple climbs the stairs, bumping into every wall and each other. By morning, they'll complain about the noise. The irony will be noted. Quietly. And so, like a tide withdrawing under moonlight, the crowd fades. Not all at once, but in lurches and whispers. Someone hiccups. Someone else kisses a mug goodnight. The goat sighs. The innkeeper stretches behind the bar. His chair fits the shape of his back too well. He cradles his last mug of the evening like it holds secrets. Somewhere upstairs, a boot drops to the floor. The fire crackles, then quiets. And for a few moments, the inn rests. Not clean, not orderly, but still standing. Still full of stories. Climbing the stairs in a medieval inn is not a decision. It's an act of commitment. Each step creaks with complaint, some louder than others, some shifting subtly underfoot as if reconsidering their place in the world. It's not just a climb. It's a wager between the body and the structure. Who will give up first? Upstairs, the world narrows. Walls lean in, ceilings slant with age. The passage is lit only by memory and the occasional flicker from a sputtering candle stub wedged into a crack in the wall. The rooms vary in size and purpose, but most share one thing in common: discomfort. The lucky few who've paid extra, or at least convincingly argued for privacy, retire to single rooms with doors that mostly close and windows that sometimes open. The rest, merchants, pilgrims, wanderers, and those who travel on favors, file into a shared dormitory. It's less a room than a human archive, full of bodies stacked into rows of beds barely wide enough for one and low enough to make turning over a gamble. The beds themselves are boxes of straw and suggestion, wooden frames packed with a lumpy mass that rustles ominously with every breath. Some of the rustling is straw. Some of it is not. Blankets are unevenly distributed, coarse, scratchy, often still damp from the previous guest's dreams. Pillows, if they exist, are whatever you've brought with you or what can be made from a folded cloak, a boot, or a moral compromise. Snoring begins almost immediately. Not the soft purr of a tired child, but the cavernous, echoing resonance of exhausted men who've lived lives of hard labor and no apologies. One snores in a rhythm that suggests musical training. Another lets out deep, rolling exhalations that seem to vibrate the beams overhead. Somewhere nearby, someone begins humming a hymn in their sleep. Through their nose. It is as unsettling as it sounds. Privacy in this room is theoretical. One can pull a cloak over their face, turn to the wall, or whisper soft prayers, but there is no true silence, no solitude. Conversations continue even in dreams. A man mutters about taxes, another about fish. A third relives an argument involving a pig and a pair of missing trousers. No one responds, everyone listens. The chamber pot, located behind a limp curtain that fools no one, is both an amenity and a warning. It is full, unlovely, and, at least once tonight, will be mistaken for something else. Someone's foot will find it. They will pretend they didn't. The rest will pretend not to notice. Occasionally, someone stirs. A guest rises in confusion, unsure which bed is theirs. These encounters are brief, usually resolved by whoever has the larger boots or the more aggressive odor. Arguments are short, sleep is prized above principle, and yet, despite the straw poking through the sheets, the overlapping dreams, the unspoken pact to ignore every sound, there's something oddly soothing about it. In this crooked room, beneath a sagging roof, strangers from a dozen towns sleep side by side, their differences muffled by shared fatigue. The snoring becomes a sort of lullaby. The soft murmurs of restless sleep blend into a strange harmony. Upstairs is not peaceful, but it is protected. Warm in a communal sort of way, and for once, the goat is not here. That alone makes it luxurious. Downstairs, the last embers of the hearth dim to a deep red glow. The innkeeper, slouched behind the bar, snores into his arm, one hand still loosely holding the handle of a mug he never finished. He dreams of silence. He will not get it. Because in a medieval inn, sleep does not come gently. It arrives in shifts, snatched in corners, shared with strangers, and wrapped in the kind of warmth that smells vaguely of turnips and unwashed wool. But it comes, and in this world, that's as good as it gets. The earliest light does not enter the inn gently. It seeps in through the shutters like a rumor, dim and uncertain. Grey and colorless, it slides across the floorboards upstairs and lands on faces that groan in resistance. Somewhere beneath a mound of cloaks, a guest sighs like waking was a personal insult. Another mutters a curse meant for no one and everyone. Feet begin to hit the floor, some confidently, some with regret. A man begins rummaging under his bed for a missing boot. It's by the hearth, of course. No one knows how it got there. The goat knows. The goat is silent. The dormitory empties in slow, uneven waves. The early risers go first, merchants with tight schedules and tighter shoes, monks with guilt-fueled ambition, and those who regret what they said or sang after the second mug of ale. They leave behind footprints, the smell of damp wool, and a lingering chorus of snores from those who refuse to acknowledge the arrival of morning. One man insists in his sleep that he never touched the cheese. No one had asked. Downstairs, the innkeeper is already upright. Technically, his body is vertical. His eyes are open, but his soul is still navigating its way back from wherever it wandered in the night, likely a quiet place with no guests, no mugs, and no stew. He stares into the near-empty hearth as though it owes him answers. Moments later, Marjorie arrives. Her shawl is wrapped tight, her stride is straight, and her expression suggests she has already had to deal with something ridiculous before even leaving her room. She begins the silent assessment of overnight damages. 2 stools overturned. 1 candle missing. Someone has smeared jam on the broom handle. Why, no one knows. She doesn't ask. She's learned not to. Questions start soon enough. Has anyone seen my satchel? Did I pay last night? Is this my goat? To each, Marjorie offers a slow blink, followed by the universally understood, maybe. Denials follow next. I didn't spill that ale. I wasn't the one snoring. I never said that about the monk's sandals. Protest is louder in the morning, especially when heads throb and memories blur. The guilty are easy to spot. They're the ones insisting on their innocence before anyone's accused them. The bard returns, bleary-eyed and still optimistic. He announces he has written a new verse to commemorate the previous evening's stew. He is handed a bowl of porridge and told to chew quietly. For once, he complies. Breakfast is served with the same ingredients, the same method, and the same caution. Stew is reheated. Bread is reissued. Ale is poured. The guests, one by one, find their mugs, their boots, and their excuses. Some pay in coin, others in apologies. A few leave before either is requested. No one wants to be the last to go. That's when Marjorie starts cleaning. By the time the sun reaches a height that could reasonably be called morning, the guests have dispersed like a fading storm. Some slip out sheepishly. Others stride out with the false pride of those who believe their presence was a gift, but none of them speak of what happened after supper. That's the rule. The goat is escorted out. Again, Marjorie, armed with a broom and a look of quiet vengeance, scrapes something off a bench that should not have been there and may not have been food. The floor is sticky. One stool leans to the left now, either protest or structural failure. It's hard to tell. The innkeeper stands behind the counter, both hands wrapped around a fresh mug of ale like it's the last warm thing in the world. He gazes over the room, sighs, and says exactly what he says every morning. Well, that wasn't too bad. It was, of course. But it's easier to lie to yourself when the stew's still warm and the worst is over. Marjorie walks past with a tray of mismatched spoons, a frayed cloth, and the expression of someone who will not, under any circumstances, answer another question before sunrise tomorrow. She refills the stew pot with water, a pinch of salt, and a generous measure of faith. Breakfast, like trouble, always comes again. Outside, the village is waking. A cart rattles by. A rooster screams into the void. Somewhere, a blacksmith begins hammering as though offended by silence. And just like that, the world resumes. The door opens. A farmer enters carrying a sack of ambiguous vegetables. Behind him, a woman in a travel-stained cloak steps in with the polite smile of someone about to argue about prices. And naturally, a night follows, helmet dented, voice too loud, already asking if they serve something called mead with purpose. They look around. Nods are exchanged. Coins are hesitantly offered, and questions, so many questions, begin again. The innkeeper takes a sip. Marjorie tightens her apron. Her chair is right. A mug is filled. And somewhere beneath the counter, the goat waits for its next opportunity. The stew remains mysterious. The guests remain unpredictable, but they always come back. There are inns that change with the years, shifting with new furniture, new faces, new ways. This is not one of them. Here, things repeat themselves not from laziness, but from tradition, like a wheel turning in soft mud. The stew remains unexplainable. The benches creak in the same tone. Even the goat, one suspects, has memorized the rhythm of the day and the shape of its welcome. And yet, despite the repetition, the inn lives. It mutters, it breathes, it adapts, just enough. Around midday, the place grows quieter, not from emptiness, but from exhaustion. The stew has done its work. So has the ale. Guests lean back, not asleep, but not entirely present. Their faces wear the slack expressions of people temporarily freed from decision-making. Time passes slowly, like syrup down a cold spoon. Then, a new group appears. At first glance, they seem like all the others, a soldier with too much armor and too little patience, a merchant already fanning himself as though the air has wronged him, a woman who carries herself with sharp politeness and eyes that measure everything, but they're different. They arrive with expectations. The soldier demands a clean table. The merchant asks if the kitchen has options. The woman inquires about quiet rooms, as if the word quiet had any place here. The inn responds by continuing exactly as it was, warm, cluttered, slightly damp, and entirely indifferent. Marjorie does not flinch. She brings them bowls. She brings them bread that could break fingers and ale that questions life choices. When asked what's in the stew, she answers, "What's left?" That ends the conversation. Nearby, the bard, yes, he's still here, attempts to charm a new audience. He strums gently, hums a few lines about distant valleys and a lost cow, and eyes the room hopefully. No one listens. He plays louder. Marjorie walks past and sets a ladle in his bowl with such precision that the message is unmistakable. The music stops. Under one table, the goat has returned, curled into itself like a rug with opinions. A child feeds it a heel of bread and claims it as his own. No one argues. The goat doesn't either. Ownership here is vague, especially where goats are concerned. Conversations begin to rise like mist. Someone recounting a dream about owls and war. Two travelers debating whether or not the ale tasted better 3 weeks ago. It did not. A monk explaining, to no one in particular, the spiritual benefits of not bathing too often. No one invites him to elaborate. A mug spills. A spoon is dropped. A man sneezes and blames the goat. And above it all, the innkeeper watches, calm, detached, polishing a mug with a cloth that is older than several of the guests. He does not speak unless spoken to. Even then, he answers in syllables, not sentences. Experience has taught him that the less he says, the fewer stories people feel compelled to tell him. Evening edges in, not with a bang, but with a shuffle. The sun lowers, casting the tables in shadows. A few candles are lit reluctantly. The hearth is coaxed into flame again, and the air thickens with smoke, ale, and the anticipatory hush of people wondering what kind of night this will be. Supper begins again. Same stew, slightly thicker. Same bread, slightly older. The guests do not complain, or rather, they do, but not with the expectation of change. It's part of the ritual. Gripe, chew, swallow, nod. Even those who grumbled loudest hours ago now raise their mugs in tired camaraderie, as if to say, "We've survived worse." The bard, somehow still upright, offers a toast. It's not elegant. It involves something about turnips and destiny, but people raise their mugs anyway. Because at this hour, in this place, even bad poetry tastes a little like belonging. As the final clink of cutlery fades into the soft murmur of digestion, the atmosphere begins to shift. The stew sits heavy now, more suggestion than substance, but solid enough to press on ribs. The ale does the rest, rounding edges, softening arguments and lowering voices. Guests lean back with the groans of the mildly victorious. They've eaten. They've endured. That will suffice. But the night isn't done. Not here. Inns are strange things after supper. They become looser, stranger. No longer just rooms and tables, but arenas for performance, confession, and catastrophe. The hour calls for spectacle, even if it must be invented. There is no official stage, of course, but that doesn't stop anyone. The bard takes his chance again. He stands, slowly, dramatically, and announces his next song. It is titled "The Lady in the Leaky Chamber Pot," and it is, in his words, a tragic comedy of love, plumbing, and regret. He doesn't make it past the first verse. Marjorie appears beside him like a storm cloud with hands and places a bowl in front of him with just enough force to communicate finality. He sits. In the corner, a new game of dice begins. The stakes this time are peculiar: a belt buckle, 3 bent nails, and a crust shaped vaguely like a map of Flanders. Someone bets a haiku, someone else offers an insult. The dice are thrown. Arguments bloom. Nothing is resolved. Everyone insists they've won. A quiet traveler near the window reveals a flute, carefully wrapped in cloth. He plays 3 notes, clear, soft, lovely. The goat, without warning, leaps from beneath the table and knocks him flat. No one is surprised. The goat has taste. Laughter ripples through the room, warm and wild. Someone begins clapping. Someone else starts juggling walnuts. A third, possibly a retired scribe or a lunatic, begins reciting laws from an ancient charter in a voice like gravel poured into a sack. The room listens politely for a few lines before returning to their mugs. The innkeeper, unmoved, leans against the wall with a practiced slouch. He knows this hour well. It's when the trouble is loudest but least dangerous, when people mean no harm, only attention. He lets it happen. Interrupting would only delay the inevitable. Near the hearth, a woman with calloused hands and a voice like wind over wheat begins humming a folk tune. Others join in, off-key, off-rhythm, and utterly sincere. A monk taps a rhythm on his cup with the handle of a spoon. The goat tries to harmonize, fails, is ignored. It is not organized, it is not rehearsed, but for a moment the inn feels like a single, mismatched body, breathing, laughing, arguing in harmony. A rough, ragged song of humanity that needs no melody to feel real, and then, slowly, it begins to dissolve. The bard loses his audience, trailing off mid-stanza into nonsense syllables. A man slumps over his own arm and begins snoring with such dedication it draws polite applause. One of the merchants dozes off mid-sentence about grain prices. His companion uses him as a footrest. Marjorie stacks mugs in a tidy pyramid, each clang a soft signal that the performance is over. No words needed. The room reads her movements as clearly as a closing bell. Some guests rise, others shuffle. A few simply tilt and stay where they are, held in place by stew and the weight of their own stories. There is always one who resists. Tonight, it's a wide-eyed peddler who approaches the counter as if ordering a feast. "Something light," he says, "perhaps a duck." The innkeeper replies by handing him a heel of bread and a recommendation to sleep it off. He takes both. The goat has returned to its spot by the fire, curled into a smug ball of warmth and entitlement. Technically, it's not allowed indoors. Realistically, no one wants to deal with removing it again. The innkeeper begins his final ritual, the midnight patrol. Candle in hand, he checks for embers, for overturned mugs, for snorers too close to the fire. He adjusts a slumped body from table to bench, a maneuver executed with such quiet finesse it might be mistaken for kindness. It's not. It's practice. He counts the coins behind the bar, some real, some symbolic, some likely cursed. Buttons, tokens, 2 carved bones, and that same shoe, returned again like a homing pigeon. He places it in the bowl marked undecided value. Upstairs calls. The beds creak overhead. The night groans on, but more quietly now. The inn, once a riot of sound, begins to sink into slumber. But this is no palace. No temple, it is an inn. And sleep, like everything else here, must be earned. Upstairs, the air has thickened, not just with heat, but with humanity. The shared sleeping room is a tapestry of exhaustion, tangled limbs, and the slow rise and fall of breathing chests. But this is no gentle dormitory. This is a chorus of discomfort, a cathedral of snores. The first sound is soft, a snort, brief and tentative, as though the dreamer isn't quite committed. Then comes another, deeper, bolder, vibrating against the wooden beams with the confidence of someone who has never heard himself sleep. Soon, the room is filled with a symphony of competing frequencies. One man snores in staccato bursts like a nervous squirrel. Another emits a low, continuous rumble that suggests geological activity. The monk, naturally, snores in Latin. Someone mumbles in their sleep, something about carrots. Someone else whispers, repeatedly, "No, my lord," in a tone that raises uncomfortable questions no one wants answered. A boot falls to the floor with a solid thud. No one stirs. Not even the goat, now firmly nestled beneath someone's cloak as if it were always welcome there. It doesn't belong. It never has. But there it remains, dignified in defiance. The straw mattresses creak with every shift of weight. Not soft creaks, but sharp, accusatory ones. If you're not jabbed by a splinter in the first 5 minutes, you're either lucky or sharing with someone who is. The bedding rustles constantly. Not just from movement, but from suspicion. Everyone suspects something is crawling. Few confirm it. No one admits it. The heat builds. Bodies generate warmth quickly in close quarters. And with the windows shuttered and the air stagnant, the room ripens. Blankets are kicked off. Cloaks are shed. Someone opens a shutter and immediately regrets it as a cold breeze sweeps in, accompanied by a bold owl who perches on the sill and stares into the darkness like a judgmental librarian. It will not leave. The smell is committed. A complex blend of turnip stew, digestion, wet wool, and the sweet, sour tang of socks that have seen too many miles. Add in goat musk and breath warmed by ale, and the scent could be bottled as a form of punishment. But everyone is too tired to notice or care. Every now and then, someone rises, gently, guiltily, seeking the chamber pot with the desperation of a man in crisis. It is full. It is unavoidable. It is also currently being used as a footrest by a man who will wake up in an hour, screaming. A latecomer stumbles in, confused by the silence and overwhelmed by the snoring. He selects a bed with the confidence of a man who thinks the world is fair. It isn't. The bed is already claimed. The resulting dispute is short, muffled by fatigue, and settled by boot size. No one cheers. The goat shifts slightly and resumes its nap. Through it all, Marjorie sleeps in the small back room behind the stairs, ears attuned not to silence, but to changes in it. She can sleep through a dozen snorers and a goat argument, but the sound of a lute string being plucked after hours will rouse her like a summoned demon. So far, all is well, or well enough. Downstairs, the innkeeper snoozes behind the bar in a chair that curves like a parenthesis around his spine. His mug sits unfinished. His dreams are quiet, heavy, and tinged with the smell of stew. In this place, sleep is not beautiful. It is not gentle. It is stolen, shared, wrestled into submission. But it comes, as it always does, wrapped in shadows and sweat and the comfort of a roof, however warped. Because here, in this tangle of rafters and snores, horizontal counts as victory. The first light of morning arrives not as a revelation, but as a mistake. It slips through the cracks in the shutters with the sheepish hesitance of something that knows it is unwelcome. The sky has not yet turned blue, only less black. The air is still thick with the smells of sleep and stew and regret. Yet somehow, someone stirs. A groan emerges from beneath a woolen blanket. Not the groan of pain, though there's always plenty of that, but of unfairness, as if waking up were a punishment handed down by indifferent gods. A pair of feet hit the floor. The boards creak their disapproval, another body shifts, a third sighs. The day has begun, whether anyone agrees with it or not. Downstairs, the innkeeper is already up, or at least his body is. His posture resembles a man standing only because sitting would require effort. His eyes are open but distant, gazing somewhere between the physical world and the soft, imagined silence of a field with no customers. He doesn't speak. He doesn't move. He simply exists. Moments later, Marjorie enters. Not storming, not dragging, but simply arriving, like a force of nature with chores. She's wrapped in a shawl, her hair braided into a knot that suggests both functionality and vengeance. She surveys the room without blinking. Her eyes take in everything, the slanted stool, the empty ale mugs, the suspicious sticky patch near the hearth. She does not comment, she simply begins. The questions arrive soon after. They always do. Has anyone seen my satchel? Did I pay last night? Is this my goat? Each is met with the same answer, a slow, patient blink, followed by a non-committal shrug. Marjorie does not lie. She simply withholds judgment. Then come the denials. I didn't spill that. I wasn't the one snoring. I never said that about the monk's sandals. Voices rise defensively, trying to push the night back into forgettable fog. But evidence lingers. A ladle stuck in someone's belt, a half-eaten turnip in someone's boot, a poem scrawled across the bar in spilled ale. The bard reappears, eyes red, claiming he's written a new verse about the dream he had where stew turned into a woman. He's handed porridge and told to be quiet. He obeys, for now. Breakfast returns like a ghost. Stew, thinned and stirred with cautious optimism. Bread, sliced and slightly less rigid than yesterday. Ale, served with the faintest hint of judgment. It's not nourishment, it's ritual. A way to prove the day has, in fact, started. By the time the sun fully climbs above the roofline, most guests have either paid, bartered, or quietly slipped out before the goat could block the door again. Some leave with laughter, others with headaches, one with someone else's hat. But none speak of what happened after supper. That is the unspoken rule. Whatever transpired in the stew-fueled blur of the evening now belongs to history, or fiction. The common room is quiet, not peaceful, but recovering. A few glowing embers mutter in the hearth. A chair leans farther than it should. Marjorie, now armed with a bucket, scrapes something unidentifiable from a bench. Her face betrays nothing. Her movements are slow, steady, final. The goat is gone, for now. The innkeeper cradles his first ale of the day like it's a relic passed down from a long line of barkeeps. He mutters the same thing he mutters every morning. Well, that wasn't too bad. It was. But saying it out loud makes it easier to sweep. Marjorie walks past with a tray of used spoons, a frayed rag, and the expression of a woman who has no time for philosophical inquiry. She refills the pot with water, salt, and something that might be faith. The stew is not dead. It is waiting. Outside, the village groans into life. A cart rolls past, its wheels shrieking in protest. A rooster announces its grievances. A blacksmith hammers something loud enough to offend birds, and the door opens again. A farmer steps in carrying a sack of something root-like and unresolved. Behind him, a woman with a polite smile already preparing to complain about the price of stew. And naturally, a knight enters too, dented and loud, declaring his thirst before even removing his helmet. The inn receives them without ceremony. Coins are exchanged, questions asked, answers, vague and sticky, provided. A chair is righted, a mug is filled, and the cycle begins again. The stew still simmers. The floor still tilts. The goat, one suspects, still has a spare key. There are places in the world where mornings arrive with elegance. Golden light, soft silence, the scent of fresh bread drifting across polished floors. This is not one of those places. Here, in the inn, morning stumbles in like a traveler who lost a bet. It crashes against the rafters, echoes through the beams, and settles in every crack like dust. But it comes, and with it, the rituals begin again. Marjorie is already at the hearth, stirring the pot with the resigned determination of someone who knows it will never truly be empty. Water sloshes, salt is flung in with a shrug, and yesterday's ambition, what little remains of it, is folded into the simmering mass. The stew doesn't need to improve. It only needs to persist. The innkeeper leans against the bar, holding his first mug of the day like a relic. He doesn't drink yet. Not until the stew bubbles. Not until the room breathes. The door opens. Again. This time it's a farmer with a sack of something vaguely vegetable. He doesn't speak, just nods and takes his usual seat, the one that lists slightly to the left. Behind him comes a woman in a travel cloak, her eyes already scanning the room for imagined injustices. She asks if prices have changed. They haven't. She huffs anyway. And then, of course, the knight. Helmet dented, voice loud, ego louder. He demands ale, stew, respect, in that order. He receives 1.5 of those things. They settle in, they always do. Marjorie serves the stew with her usual flair. 1 scoop for sustenance, 1 scoop for humility. The bread, now hard enough to be considered defensive architecture, is portioned out with precision. The ale flows gently, reluctantly. like a creek that's learned not to trust the banks. Someone asks if there's a vegan option. The question hangs in the air like a mosquito, small, annoying, and inevitably ignored. The inn does not change much. The faces shift, the boots vary, but the bones of the place remain the same. Crooked beams, soft light, a smell of ash and ale that clings to everything. Even the goat, especially the goat. No one remembers letting it back in. It's just there, already asleep under a table, again. And despite the mess, the noise, the strange sticky patches on the floor, the guests keep returning. Maybe it's the warmth, maybe it's the stew, maybe it's the fact that, for one brief meal or one long night, they can be part of something that doesn't ask questions, that doesn't care where they've been or where they're going, only that they sit, eat, and stay upright. Or not. Upright is optional, because here, in this inn held together by habit, by hands, by hope and barley, mistakes are swept up with the crumbs. And no one asks questions before breakfast.